Does traveling change anything?
Well, it depends on whether or not you're talking about astral traveling or spiritual traveling or physical traveling or mental traveling. It could change something. Not much, but it could change. Change your location for sure. Come in.
How about primarily physical traveling?
That's always a refreshing thing to do under certain conditions, depending on what the conditions are. If you're going to a war zone, then yeah, it could be dramatic. That could, shock you beyond your imagination. Right. So, depending on the circumstances, that could determine the kind of change and the amount of change any person can undergo. But usually, people, if you're talking about a casual vacation, you don't expect much change. You're not going there to change much. Going there to have a good time and take care of business and then come back home to your normal, usual way of being, ordinarily.
Is there a spiritual component in exposing oneself to other cultures?
There can be. There can be something that's not visible, not obvious, except by what you're made to do when you're where you went. See, what you have to do when you're there, that can more or less give you a sense of the value of your purpose, and whether or not there's a lesson involved in that. That's something which you have to determine for yourself. It could be very spiritual. You could save someone's life. Yeah. And not always directly. You can just be seen by somebody and change their mind and save their life. When we're talking about the bigger picture of karmatic machinations, right, and workings, you never know how the glimpse of someone can alter a person's destiny.
And so if one is unaware of the effect they're having on others, is it having an effect on yourself?
It may. The effect it has on others may be just as unconscious as the effect on yourself, depending on what you find out about what your visit or your journey was about. Sometimes it takes years to put together what the implications of meaning. Meanings are of certain experiences that we have overseas, going back to places we formerly lived or visited, say, have some karmic connection with. There's always that. That can always open a person up to other dimensions of their own consciousness, see? Or shut them down. So if it's opening, it could also be closing.
Does one's identity change as one gets away from their familiar culture?
Not necessarily. You have to get away from the self-identity itself, that matrix, and then there can be some changes. But going as you are in your so-called ordinary egoic state and coming back in the same state, it's pretty normal. Going there, having some kind of heavy experience and then coming back changed, that could change your life forever. Depends on the magnitude of the experience. The drama or the trauma of what you experienced. In any case, it's a debt. You have to see it as such. You went there to pay people, you went there to pay back for whatever you were consuming, and so it's good to see it as something you were doing in the service of other peeps, as well as yourself.
Does the fact that a culture has a different spiritual basis have any particular meaning?
It could, depending on what your connection is with that particular spiritual basis. Yeah. You could be going back there to start something, you could be going back there to end something. Or you could be going there, back there, or forward there to create something. To empower something for yourself. Say, validate something for yourself.
When I was traveling in Southeast Asia recently, I saw a lot of people giving prayers and offerings to statues in a way that's unfamiliar here in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there a value in giving offerings to Buddha statues?
Could be. Well, they've been doing it for a long time. It's been a very, I guess you might say, fact of civilizations to have symbolic, I guess you might say, representation of various deities, see? And there's power in that. Of course, the power is subjective, but then the appearance is objective. So there's something there. Of course, we can't say we on the mortal plane know it all and what the consequences or effects are of these things, because we are talking about the fact that you're coming from the inside and you have an inner connection with something. It could be very fundamental, as in the case of the native cultures. It could be a branch, a leaf, anything, see, that has a certain kind of sacred implication to you or meaning to you. It can be very powerful. It's not even a matter of worshiping it. It's just knowing what it is, having it, picking it up, and dealing with it. Everything has their karma. So we can say then from that viewpoint that everything is alive, nothing is dead. Okay? No planet is just dead. It's there. You know, it's a causal force in the link and the chain of planetary existence. And it's taking on rays. That means it is emitting rays, transmitting rays. Even something as dead as the moon, now they're finding out that there may be more to the moon than they've known before, and other planets that are moons. And they're seeing peculiar formations around them and peculiar phenomena seemingly related to them. And so there's a lot that doesn't meet the eye, that has more to do with what's going on inside. See? So then we're talking about the layers of whatever appears. See? Appearance according to what layer, see? What level.
Is something accumulated in a statue that is given offerings or revered?
Accumulated? Is there force in that?
Yes.
Depends, of course. Could. Right. Does it take on the energy put onto it? Yes, you can say that. Right. Right. There are ways of measuring auras and psychic forces now, where there may not have been as much of that available before, apart from psychic perception. Now we have maybe more digital, subtle rays of light perception that can give us a better sense of what was there, what is there, and we see a lot of that being used in the psychic field today.
Is ancient equivalent to timeless?
Ancient is not necessarily timeless. Ancient has more of a time kind of an implication. I mean, the earlier ancient, maybe even primordial basically, but really historic, basically. And then you have prehistoric. And these are the ancient ways. I mean, these are the tested and proven ideas of people who have walked the path for a long time. See? And so you have elders who are responsible for the ancient voices, see, of wisdom from the past in a particular line, in a particular culture, at a particular time. So there's power in all of it. Yeah. Ancient is not necessarily eternal. And it may not always be good either. See? Ancient bad ways, and you have ancient good ways. Ancient ways of darkness and ancient ways of goodness and enlightenment.
Does preservation of what's ancient keep it in the now?
The appearance of it might be helpful to some, but in the now, in terms of consciousness, in the inner consciousness or the storehouse of consciousness, also called the causal plane, everything is right there. It's accessible, it's knowable, if you have access to it. Mm-hmm.
So, does a spiritual tradition have a responsibility to continually re-examine the ancient and keep it modern, let's say, or topical?
It depends on the tradition. Some traditions are not interested in change. Some are inevitably changed by time and developments. They depending on what tradition you're talking about. Some are more, let's say, open to contemporary experiences and values. Others are not.
So then would ancient traditions, let's say, take on a hollow effect if they're not kept new?
They could, depending. A little bit of change might be too much for some. No change might be just right for others. Some traditions, depending on what traditions you're talking about or referring to, may have already requirements that are too intense for ordinary people to maintain. So, with standards of certain teachers, if you're talking about teachers and teachings, that's traditions, then some might be too high for most people. Or even incredible for many. Impossible standards.
In observing the
So then it's not the tradition that should change, but the individual. That's the important thing. It's not the tradition. But does the individual change? And in what way can it change? Either parallel to a tradition or beyond the tradition. How does the individual then awaken to itself as its own tradition? That's a good question.
And how does one know when to do that, or how to do that?
No one knows how one does that, except that when the pressure and the heat is upon you, it seems like it's inevitable. It's inevitable. You have no choice. You have to go. You have to go where it goes. And experiences along the way help to shape what that is, especially painful experiences or heartful experiences. Change individuals for, let's say, the sake of their progression.
It would seem that preservation of an ancient tradition is a responsibility of a group or a culture.
Could be. Depends on what it is. So it depends on what society you're talking about, what institute you're talking about, what movement exactly you're talking about, what government you're talking about, what art or science you're talking about.
And so, for example, when a culture like the Khmer or Cambodian culture goes from building these massive temples and a devotion to Buddhism to ending up hundreds of years later with the killing fields and extermination of their own population, what's really happened?
It's human nature, not religion. It's human nature. Human nature is what is responsible for religions and institutions. And so nothing's happened. See, if you're talking about the Buddhists, that's remained intact, see, because that has to do with a realization. See, an indestructible realization that reaches into the core of human intelligence, which then causes many people to resonate with it as a universal fact. Same with a Christian realization. Same thing. And other traditions where you had a certain kind of special teacher leading the way, who happened to be an extreme intelligence. And so that's another thing. Okay? And then we're talking about a living tradition. And then who's left behind to keep the living tradition going on? Okay? When you have those issues. Who's living the way of the teacher originally? The original teacher. Not too many can do that. Not too many feel they're here for that, but yet awakening is its own process. And you can awaken spontaneously or you can awaken because of that.
So do spiritual traditions have, let's say, life and death cycles?
As you see, some are here and some are gone. Obviously, everything living has a cycle of time. A beginning and an end point, like the planet, like the universe. seems to be eternal. And some would say not so. And it's dying and living at the same time.
And so when human nature overcomes a spiritual tradition and people resort to that kind of violence and destruction, does that mean that the spiritual tradition has died?
No, it means that a certain generation, perhaps, under certain conditions, has fallen beneath the standards. But again, in order for humans to preserve what they're happening, sometimes they must go to war. So that's not in contradiction to anything that has occurred in terms of the evolution of mankind from the beginning. It has been the manner of solving problems for too many humans, not advanced enough to find higher solutions.
So would you say that war is a permanent fact or condition of humankind?
Not necessarily. It is ingrained, it's inbred, but it's not permanent. I don't stretch it to that point. It's not permanent. No. It's not a has to be or must be. It's just the normal way it is. So it's in place. It is a conventional solution to conventional problems of difference and hostility and conflict. I'm not saying it's good, but it obviously occurs because of inevitable pressures that are put on the people. They have to stand up for themselves. And so that happens everywhere. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's not a good or bad thing. It's natural. It's natural. It's human nature. That means it's human, natural. Natural for the human. The maybe undeveloped human, and also the developed human as well.
Is it the desire to preserve conditions and traditions that leads to war?
Can lead to war. Anything can lead to war. It depends. Political differences lead to war. Relational differences lead to war. And self or body-mind conflict leads to psychological warfare, psychic warfare. Right. War is inside, and then the war is outside. Sometimes because the war is outside, it is then inside certain people, because that's all they're exposed to. And so becomes part of the culture of violence.
And yet it would seem that it takes the rulers or leaders having an instinct towards war for it to happen. That common people won't necessarily create the same conditions.
Despite that, you have people who have moved towards peace. Despite the leaders, despite whatever the trend of the masses might be at any particular time in history, you have those that are moved by the spirit of peace, and they stand by it. You always have that percentage of human beings balancing the scales out in every time and climb throughout the universes, not just the Earth, but the universes.
Does exposure to other cultures and traditions reduce the inclination towards war?
Sometimes. You're saying, does education make a difference? It could. And it could also not make a difference. Depends on the karma of the individual, the karma of the situation. And then there's also the possibility that no matter how dark and how low a human being goes, or is, it can be awakened. There can be a breakthrough, an awakening, for sure. It can happen at any point. Under high pressure conditions, it's almost ordinary.
And can war arise from spiritually practicing people?
all the time. But we're not talking about enlightened beings necessarily. Spiritually practicing people are often at war.
Does a more,
In terms of factions within any religious hierarchy, the differences of views. It's human nature to be in conflict. See? And we're talking about spiritual nature to resolve that conflict. And go the way of peace. Which for the most part seems like it's unnatural. Okay? It's supernatural. It's truly natural. But the machinery of conflict and violence have to be more or less worn out for this kind of peace, the peace of cessation, the peace of exhaustion, done, finished with violence, see, to have its way. The condition has to be there for it, but under the right conditions. Peace can have its way. Peace will have its way, in some cases.
and so does a spiritually conditioned people, let's say, meet fire with fire, or do they resist?
Depends on their conditions, depends on them. You have to do what is best for you if you're the leader of a country or a tribe. You have to do what is best for you to do. Everyone does do what is best for them to do under the conditions.
And so can a culture, let's say, exhaust itself of its warlike tendencies?
Can that happen?
Yes.
Of course. At that level, anything is possible. It could take one soldier just looking at his own sword or rifle, say, I'm done with this. It's over. Can't do it anymore. I wouldn't call that conscientious objection necessarily. It could be an awakening. Hey, this is useless. This is nonsense. You guys do it. You guys like it? You do it. I'm out of here. Could be like that. Right? And there's a call to a higher order of reality. Requiring a different kind of courage. See? Courage to be true to the spiritual. I don't mean religious. The spiritual.
And so can war have a purge and cleansing effect on a nation or people?
Violence usually does.
And so would you say there is freedom to be found in violence?
Well, the country is the land of the free. How was it won? Wasn't won by negotiations. We wish, but not so. It'll be a time, quite a time perhaps, before, say, this level of conflict is put behind human beings. And there will have to be a great purge, hot purge, a mind purge, and a body purge, and even a soul purge, before that becomes